Hi, it's Dwyer, dwyercrime.blog, gamblersadvisory.com. It is Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, here online on YouTube, the account is Esquire777. We take strong opinions here, strong positions on cases, right? For example, I still think Amanda Knox is guilty. For example, I still think Adnan Syed is guilty. I'm entitled to my own opinion under American law, right? I also feel that Lee Harvey Oswald might be, in fact, is likely innocent. Well, let's correct a mistake here. Let me offer a retraction on a major case from my own past, my own childhood, where I thought a witness possibly discredited the popular narrative. In the 1970s, I was a child in New York City. There was a serial killer on the loose. He was writing letters to well-known journalists at New York City papers. He called himself the son of Sam. He killed without provocation. The people he killed were typically folks in their late teens, early 20s, who were out on dates, who were parked by the side of the road in a car. Maybe they were making out, maybe they were talking. They didn't know him. Suddenly, out of the darkness, he would appear. He had a .44 caliber gun, big gun, and he would start shooting into the car. Then as quickly as he appeared, he would disappear into the darkness. Right now, there were numerous sketches of him, and the sketches arguably did not look like the same person. So understand, a major moment takes place in the case. If you're a skeptic of popular narratives, you always want to pay attention to eyewitness testimony or comments that doesn't sync with what the public thinks is going on. So in Brooklyn, on July the 31st, 1977, Tommy Zaino is in his Corvette with a woman, right? She's been unidentified in most reports, right? They're in the Corvette. A car pulls up behind them. We now know that in that car is Robert Violante and Stacy Moskowitz. Right? These are young people, late teens, early 20s. Car pulls up behind them. So, of course, Zaino in a Corvette, and if you've been in a Corvette, you know that the alignment, particularly in the 70s, of the rear view mirror made it a little bit challenging to get a clear view of what's in back of you. But just to understand, Tommy Zaino is a key person in the Son of Sam mythology, because Zaino claims that whatever he was doing in his Corvette, he looked at the rear view window and he was able to see behind him. And he saw a figure walk up to the car behind him, right? The figure is wearing what could be a wig, right? It's wild, straight hair that doesn't sync with the hair that David Berkowitz had. Right? The body type of the figure who comes out of the park and walks up to the car behind Tommy Zaino's doesn't match the body type of David Berkowitz. Right? The figure who comes out of the park and walks up to the car behind Tommy Zaino's then takes out a gun and fires into the car after getting in a little bit of a crouch. That figure fires 4 shots, according to Tommy Zaino, and then disappears into the darkness. Stacy Moskowitz is shot dead. Robert Violante loses a lot of his vision, but he survives the attack. Tommy Zaino, on an unsolved mystery show hosted by Robert Stack, said that when Berkowitz gets arrested, he did not think that the person he saw commit the Stacy Moskowitz murder behind his Corvette was David Berkowitz. As Zaino said clearly on camera for the interview for that unsolved mystery show, I didn't think it was David Berkowitz then, and I don't think it's David Berkowitz now. Right now, understand, Berkowitz claims that he was a member of a satanic cult. That's how he got into murdering people. At different times, and Berkowitz is inconsistent. At different times, Berkowitz has made the claim that he didn't do all the murders. Also, in his letter to Jimmy Breslin, big-time New York reporter at the time, right? And understand, the 70s was an era of big-time people in the press, right? You might recall Watergate, Woodward and Bernstein, right? Jimmy Breslin was big in New York City. And in the letter from the son of Sam to Jimmy Breslin, he refers to other people, right? The 22 disciples of hell. In addition to including in that letter a satanic symbol, right? Also, just understand, he refers to a figure in that letter called John Wheaties. We now know that that individual, the name was John Carr in real life, was shot to death. There's an open question on whether he committed suicide or whether somebody did the killing. Right? Understand, John Wheaties' brother also dies shortly after David Berkowitz is arrested and in custody. So you have an entire community of true crime sleuths out there who believe that this satanic cult was behind most of the Son of Sam killings, and that the person referenced directly in the Son of Sam's letter to police was silenced, perhaps by the group. Right? Understand, too, you have one of my heroes, Maury Terry, an investigator who looked into the Son of Sam murders. Talk about how a teenager took him around the park, which was right next to where Berkowitz lived, and took him to the spot where satanic meetings were held. There were satanic writings on the wall when Maury Terry was there. Right? Other people have talked about going by that park building and seeing it filled with a dozen or more people doing chants. Right? So just understand, the satanic cult angle has taken on a life of its own. And it feeds into this idea that the Son of Sam killings were cult killings, not the work of one assassin. Well, let me just say, we live in interesting times. And by the way, in the comment section of this video, I'm going to place a link to an Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack episode in which Tommy Zaino on the show says, I didn't think it was David Berkowitz then. I don't think it's David Berkowitz now. Well, folks, we now have the internet. We now have YouTube investigative types who are looking into claims, right? Looking into claims of people like Tommy Zaino. There is a YouTuber out there who has done great work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place a link to her video where she has put in the audio. After a lot of research, clearly, she's put in the audio of Tommy Zaino's interview with the police. Right now, just understand, Zaino is the Rosetta Stone. He himself was 19 when all this happened. Right? If you believe him, then he witnessed one of the murders attributed to Son of Sam being done by someone other than David Berkowitz. Well, let me just say, the purpose of this video is to point out that Zaino is inconsistent. His story has changed over the years, right? The YouTuber who has put up a video, and at the time I'm making this, that video has been up for 6 months and has less than 500 views. Folks, in my opinion, as someone who studied the Son of Sam, this is one of the most important videos on YouTube, period. Right? It shouldn't have less than 500 views. It should have thousands of views. A YouTuber named Crackling Rosie, True Crime. Again, it's Crackling Rosie, True Crime. Has up the audio from Zaino's initial interview with police. Now, the folklore is that Zaino sees someone who looks like he's wearing a wig, who's far thinner than David Berkowitz, commit the murder of Stacy Moskowitz. In reality, Zaino places the height of the shooter at 5'9". In reality, Zaino tells police, and he sounds uncertain, but he tells police that he thinks the person he saw do the murder was David Berkowitz. Right, let's just say this interview disappointed me. Right, up until this interview, I thought Tommy Zaino was very clear that while he didn't know who shot Stacy Moskowitz, he knew it wasn't David Berkowitz. Instead, what he describes is that the person could have been David Berkowitz with Wilder here. Right? Let me also say, too, that the cops have to drag information out of him. Right? He's not a guy who comes in and wants to make sure that the cops understand that the man they have arrested for the crime is not the Son of Sam. You get the opposite feeling here. You get the feeling that Zaino saw the murder. You get the feeling that Zaino believes that it could be David Berkowitz, but isn't 100% certain, but doesn't have a good reason to think that it's not David Berkowitz. You get the feeling Zaino didn't see the person that long. Also, until now, we've heard of a yellow Volkswagen leave the murder scene. And we've been wondering, whose Volkswagen was that? Because, of course, Berkowitz didn't drive a yellow Volkswagen. Well, in the Zaino retelling here to the police, he talks, and Zaino's a car mechanic, he talks about hearing the Volkswagen. He talks about seeing not the yellow car, but the top of the car. Going by the sound of the car, he concluded that it was a Volkswagen. Let's just say his testimony opens up more questions than it provides answers. Was it even a yellow Volkswagen? There's a lot of mystery there. So what I want to tell people is simply that Tommy Zaino is far less convincing once you hear his actual statements to law enforcement. Right? His statements could easily be construed as someone who saw David Berkowitz kill Stacy Moskowitz. Let me also point out, too, and we understand that John Violante, who was with Stacy Moskowitz, when she gets killed and he gets somewhat blinded, right? John Violante believes that the person who shot him was David Berkowitz. Now understand, when you're shot and you have eye problems, your testimony can really only be judged in terms of what the listener believes your ability to perceive what was happening to you was. Right? But just understand, John Violante, who's in the car with Stacy Moskowitz, in other words, he has a better view than Tommy Zaino, who's in front of him, right, in a different car. Just understand that Violante believed that David Berkowitz was the individual who shot in the car. Right? So given Zaino's less than convincing, less than definitive initial comments to law enforcement, I'm no longer certain that people other than David Berkowitz were involved in the Son of Sam shooting. Right? Berkowitz may well have been involved in a cult. In fact, I believe he was. Right? I'll agree that the initial sketches look like different people. But the evidence is going to have to be developed independently of Tommy Zaino. Right? Zaino told police initially that he thought the person who did the shooting was David Berkowitz. Right? Zaino places the height of the shooter, and understand Zaino's in a car with someone else, right? A little past 2 a.m. So Zaino's a bit preoccupied in front of the Stacy Moskowitz car. Right? So Zaino estimates that the person was about 5'9" in height. Let's say that's sufficiently close enough to David Berkowitz's height to have been David Berkowitz. Right? Zaino isn't standing there with a ruler. What we know is that the person who shot Stacy Moskowitz isn't appreciably taller than David Berkowitz. In other words, this isn't Shaquille O'Neal or some guy 6'5", right, who did this shooting. No, this is someone who Tommy Zaino tells police is around 5'9". I would say 5'9" connotes an average height guy, some guy let's say 5'6" to 5'11", which is where David Berkowitz falls into. Right? Also, where Zaino is interesting is when he says the hair color is a light brown. Now, I'll concede that doesn't match David Berkowitz's black hair. But it sounds like what Zaino's implying is that the person may well have been wearing a wig, right? He calls the hair wild. He calls the hair long. Right? Just understand, who knows? Maybe David Berkowitz, puffed up his hair. Maybe the lighting and the tint on Tommy Zaino's Corvette, as well as the angle Zaino's looking at, right? He's looking at the rear view mirror, right? Maybe that threw things off. Anyway, for investigators out there, I hope you take a look at not only the link to the Unsolved Mysteries episode that has Zaino on there, saying, I didn't think it was David Berkowitz then, I didn't think it's David Berkowitz now. Right? I want you to look at that, but also look at Cracklin' Rosie's YouTube video that has the audio of Tommy Zaino's interview with law enforcement. In my opinion, Zaino is not a strong witness. Right? I don't believe one can hang a satanic cult did this. It wasn't Berkowitz's interpretation on Zaino's initial comments to law enforcement. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.